wise, just, courageous, generous, industrious. These terms are commonly used when we're describing admirable people. They are virtues. But what is a virtue? And can it really be the basis of a moral theory? I'm a bit skeptical about that, but more about that by the end of this episode. First, let's begin to discuss the basics of virtue ethics. Commonly, philosophers begin by analyzing which actions that are good and why they are good. But virtue ethics attacks this problem from a different angle. Instead, they ask the question, what is a virtuous person? So the focus here is not really on which actions one should perform, but rather what makes up a virtuous person and a good life. Or, as Aristotle put it, what makes up a eudaimonious life. Eudaimonia is a Greek word commonly translated into English as happiness, welfare, or flourishing. But all of these words do not fully encapsulate the meaning of eudaimonia, I think. Because according to Aristotle, it is the highest of all ends. Let me elaborate. Ends or goals can be organized within a hierarchy, and eudaimonia is the end that is the most choice-worthy of all ends. Let me explain through an example. When we're children, we might pick up a pen in order to achieve the goal of learning how to write. This end of writing becomes the means to achieve another end, such as getting good grades in school, which then becomes a means to another end, like being accepted into a good university, and so on and so on. Here we have a sort of chain of ends, all linked together and aiming towards eudaimonia, the highest of all ends. It is a hierarchy of ends, where the lower ones, such as learning how to write, are pursued for further and further ends. Eudaimonia is the end that cannot be translated into a means. It is strived for solely for its own sake. This is why I don't like to translate eudaimonia into English, because happiness is a much thinner word. Eudaimonia is a sort of framework predicate that can be said about a life well lived. But this on its own does not specify what a life well lived looks like, right? To answer that question, we need to consider the human function. Let's consider a hammer. What is the function of a hammer? Simply put, its function is to strike down nails. So, striking nails is the hammer's telos, its end purpose or goal. We evaluate how good a hammer is by its capacity to perform this function well. Now, Aristotle argues that the same idea can be applied to humans as well. What is our human function? And the way to identify this function is to ask the question, what sets us apart from other objects or animals? Let's go back to the hammer. What sets it apart from other objects? Well, the metal thingy at the top seems to be a good candidate, right? If we were to remove it, would we still consider it a hammer? No. It would just be a stick, right? Or a very bad hammer that is unable to perform its function effectively. So the metal thingy is what sets it apart from other objects such as sticks, for example. Similarly, we humans have a function that sets us apart from other animals. We eat, we sleep, we defecate, we have sex, much like any other animal. But what makes us unique is that we possess rationality, according to Aristotle. And here is the thing. We perform our function well when our rational activities is guided by or in accordance with virtues. But how do we gain these virtues? Aristotle's answer is through the doctrine of the mean. Roughly put, the virtues can be found in the middle ground between two extremes. Let me elaborate. Take courage, for instance. It can be found between the two vices of cowardice on one hand and rashness on the other, and between them we find courage. And generosity is the intermediate that can be found between stinginess on the one hand and extravagance on the other. But that's not all. In order to correctly assess what counts as courageous in some situations and rash in others, one needs to possess what Aristotle refers to as phronesis, or practical wisdom. Let me give you an example. A kid who stands up to someone bullying his friend would commonly be described as possessing the virtue of courage. He puts himself at risk of getting beaten, but it is not rash, right? And here the cowardly thing to do would be to do nothing. Hence, the courageous act in this case is to stand up. But if we change the example a bit, we get a completely different result. Let's say that the bully has a knife. Then it might be rash to stand up. And the courageous thing might be to speak to a teacher, for instance. Phronesis is needed to properly evaluate every situation to find the mean, so to say. Good. So now from everything that we have gone through, we can formulate a code of conduct. This formulation can be found in Mark Timmons' book, Moral Theory. For instance, an action A performed in certain circumstances is obligatory if and only if and because A is an action that a virtuous person acting in character would not fail to perform in the circumstances in question. This formulation incorporates most of what we've been discussing regarding Aristotle's ethical theory. But now, are there any problems with this theory? Well, is there a philosophical theory that doesn't have any problems? Well, probably not. For instance, this theory fails to satisfy the standard of determinacy that we discussed in the last episode. An ethical theory should, in some way, be a guide to help me with moral decisions. But virtue ethics has problems with this standard. There are many virtues without any rank ordering, so what if you find yourself at a moral crossroads where two virtues clash? Well, the only answer you'll get from a virtue ethicist is use your phronesis. So the theory itself does not provide a clear answer on what to do. Some people might find this a perk of the theory, since it is not rigid, but I find it very troublesome. Another glaring issue is Aristotle's function argument that we discussed. If we were to formulate his argument, it might look something like this. Everything has a function. The human function is rationality. Everything ought to live in accordance with its function. Therefore, humans ought to live in accordance with rationality. To begin with, can we really say that rationality is the thing that sets us apart from animals? I highly doubt that. Some animals seem to possess similar traits. Also, there is a big problem here that is related to Hume's law. If you want to know more about that, then I suggest you watch this video here where I explain Hume's law.